Welcome to another episode of Tomes and Tunes. This is episode 40. I am your host, Arielle Silver, basically just a singer-songwriter who wanted to connect with other singer-songwriters or other songwriters during the pandemic, and it has just turned into a year-long hobby, I guess you could call it, a little passion project of mine. And I've just had songwriters from all around the world join me every week to talk about the other thing I love, one of the other things I love, which is books. And I'm very excited to also say that now I have a partner, a media partner, that is Far West Regional Folk Alliance. They are now in partnership with me with Tomes and Tunes, and it is a wonderful partnership. So I'm very happy about that. This week we have Ed A. Williams, Edward, Ed. He is from a band called Whitherward. I think that he has more than his fair share of W's in his association. Whitherward is his folk duo with Ashley Norton, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago. So if you want to catch that episode, I think it was episode 38, perhaps. Here we are on 40. And he also has a podcast called Crimes Against Folk. I'm going to invite Ed in. If you are just tuning in, please say hi in the chat box. Let me know where you're coming from, and I'm just really happy to be here with you and with our guest. Hi, Ed.
Hello.
How are you?
Doing okay. How you doing?
I am doing very well. It is so funny. You and I had never had a conversation until 30 minutes ago
Yeah.
when you popped in, and we just we went through some of the awesome topics like Paul Simon, Elizabeth Cotton, the weather. We pretty much traveled across the United States, and then
As
I was like,
people do.
as exactly as people do. And then I was like, oh, we should probably check the sound just to make sure the audio is. Yeah, don't forget that.
Yeah, it's funny how that just happened like that. It's kind of.
I know, just kind of leapt right into it. So I am here in Los Angeles. You are in Scottsdale, Arizona. You are not from Scottsdale, Arizona,
No.
but you have been making a life there. And I was actually surprised to hear that you ended up there before the pandemic. I thought that it was sort of like, oh my gosh, I got to land somewhere, because you have been on tour for years.
Yeah.
And you kind of needed to put your roots down with all the venues shutting down, right?
Yeah, I mean the initial kind of impetus was to slow down the touring anyway. That Ash and I had kind of decided that a little bit, that we needed to change how we want to tour. A little bit, since we'd been going pretty hard for the past for about 5 years, and
It's insane.
yeah, it was pretty nuts. But I mean, we got a lot of great work done, which is awesome. But we just decided, well, let's see if we can kind of slow down, and you know, I have a friend here, a really good friend of ours, who had a spare room, so she's graciously let me stay here for a while, and wasn't going to be this long because the pandemic kind of upended everybody's tables at the same time. So
I think we should have I think there should be a separate, unique, special prayer for friends with spare rooms.
yes,
Right?
I
Especially for touring musicians.
yes, I agree. We wouldn't have survived without it, I think. So.
Seriously, I hear you. I'm going to raise my glass right now to friends with spare rooms. Thank you. Oh, gosh. And also strangers with spare rooms. I mean,
Yes.
whew.
Mm-hmm. It's been great. It's been it's been nice too, because when we do connect with people that way, we have connected with people that way on the road. They become friends, and you know, we've just become a part of their lives. They become a part of ours, which has been for me, who I'm not much of a social person, so that's been kind of nice, actually, to like kind of get used to being around other people and that kind of thing. So.
Well, you know, it's funny. When we're kids, we end up in school, and, you know, it's such a regimented day. It's like, okay, well, you have math and English and history, and then you have playtime or recess. And it's
Yeah.
like you're thrown into this container, and you develop, friends, or what, like your social group, like the who gets invited to whose birthday party or whatever, kind of just based on circumstance. And then, years later, when you're no longer in school, it's like, oh, wait, how do we how do we connect with other people? How do we
Yeah.
make friends?
Yeah, exactly. Because you're right. It's like you're forced into it as children and as teenagers, and then
Yeah.
when you go to college, all of a sudden everybody's kind of on their own, and
Yeah.
they're like, well, oh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I remember that moment when I got out of college and I was like, "Oh, hello 20s. Hello Boston." Like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm no longer on a campus." Like, wow, this isn't it, it was an interesting sensation. I still remember it.
Yeah.
Remember that feeling. Yeah, and so when you're on tour and you're an independent touring musician, the beautiful thing about it is that you really are going from community to community, home to home, staying with people and kind of building a world that way. It's contained more through shared love of music and the world of small venues, like that
Yeah.
sort of thing, rather than like, oh, recess is at this time, so these are the kids that are on the playground with you.
And it can be integral. I mean, we on our podcast, I'm a podcast of Crimes Against Folk. We
Yeah.
tell stories and stuff like that. We do what we call podcumentaries about people or events in music. And when we just recently did one on Sharon Jones,
Yeah.
and one of the things I noted when I was watching the documentary about her, Miss Sharon Jones, was that one of the most important things that happened to her in her life when she got her cancer diagnosis was she had a friend who lived upstate and stayed there, like who was like a holistic doctor, nutritionist, all this kind of stuff to help her recover. And it just kind of reminded me, oh yeah, like this, as you're a musician or as you're a touring artist, these are the people that help you get from point A to point B. The fans are really important. But there are these people who kind of give back to you that are also extremely important. And I kind of was reminded of that when I watched that part of the documentary. So
Absolutely. I'm remembering right now, I mean, that kindness of strangers and kindness of friends. Listening to you talk for some reason is reminding me of years ago when I was on tour and in Abilene, Texas, and we didn't have a place to stay that night. Somehow things had around mid-Texas, things started to like break down. Like the car,
no,
our place to stay. And so we played this, it was a long gig. I had a bass player and a drummer, and we had, a 4-hour gig, 2 sets. And in between the 2 sets, I was like, okay, I've got to figure out where are we staying tonight. And I was just moving around the room and talking to people. And this one woman, slender, taller than me, she looked like a wisp of like a blade of grass. And she had a pint of beer, and I had probably a beer or something. And she said, "Oh, do you want to arm wrestle?" It's like, why, yes, I do, because I have never lost arm wrestling a girl. And I
Nice.
was like, but I had just been playing guitar for 2 hours, I have also never wrestled after playing a 2-hour set. And so we arm wrestled. She completely killed me.
Oh,
And thank goodness, though, she did, because later on in the night, she said, "Hey, do you guys need a place to stay?" And she invited us to her home to stay. She had, I think, a couple of Rottweilers to protect her in case we ended up being, a folk rock group of a threatening type. But she was so lovely, a wonderful host, and she is a stranger with a spare room. She had a spare room. I slept in a bed, and she made us a full breakfast in the morning. That kind of kindness.
yeah. It goes a long way.
Did you ever have to arm wrestle for your place to stay?
No, I've never had to do any sort of hand-to-hand combat. for anything that I've done, as far as I know. I don't know about Ashley. I mean, she's been doing this a lot longer than I have. So
Oh,
maybe she has a story of that. But
wait.
I
So
don't.
you and Ashley, did I make this up in my head? Did you guys meet in college?
No,
Okay.
we met in Nashville
Okay.
when I had moved there in 2006 to study audio production. So I'd been there for about 4 years, and then in 2010, Ashley moved there, and I met her shortly thereafter through a mutual friend of ours, and we just became, after a couple of years, became really good friends, and started working together not long after that, in around 2013, I'd say. And then we started this duo, Whitherward, in 2014. So
And am I right that you came to the name Witherword just by going through the dictionary?
yeah, we had with the
That was like a
original.
lot of pages that you had to get through to get to W Witherword, right?
Well, I may not read a ton of books, but I do love words,
Yeah.
and a mainstay, a staple of any smartphone that I have is a dictionary app
Yep.
and a
Me
word
too.
of the day.
Oh.
And one day, we decided we were going to do this duo, and then the word of the day one day was pilcrow, and I had never heard of that before. I'm like, oh, it's the
Pilcrow.
paragraph symbol. When you're working in Microsoft Word and you do show invisibles and you see the little weird P with a double bar,
That has a name?
that's
Of
called a
course it has a
pilcrow.
name. Everything has a name. Oh, I love it.
And we were going to be called the Pilcrows, but there was already a band out there.
What?
Yeah, I mean, they weren't super active, but we wanted something we could kind of own outright, in a sense.
Yeah. You don't want to
So
battle with another band just for their name.
we didn't want to have that mess. So the next day, the word of the day was Whitherward, and it kind of fit. It kind of fit what we were going for a little more, which was we wanted to be a full-time touring band, kind of not necessarily rudderless, but just more like we were on the road all the time, going from place to place, and so it kind of fit, I think, the aesthetic in our heads a little bit more. So yeah, it was just a word of the day one day.
Yeah, Witherword does have a it does have a folky kind of feel to it.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we liked about
Witherword.
it.
I mean, there's something old-fashioned. It feels like English poetry.
Yeah, it's a Middle English word,
Yeah, okay.
an archaic form of whither. So like if my example is always from the Good Place to Honey says whither to honey, and that's how we
course.
use it nowadays,
Okay.
as kind of like why me or what about me, but
Yeah.
in Middle English it had a more literal sense, like which way are you going,
Right.
So
Okay. Yeah. And is it sometimes spelled without the H? Is it always
it is
spelled?
now.
Okay.
Back again in the older style of the word, it had the H, and that helps a little more for, I think, our friends across the pond, because they have that
Whither.
syllable. Like if you think about Stewie from Family Guy, that's how he would say it. But Americans don't have that syllable, so for Americans, it's a little more difficult to spell correctly.
You know, this really speaks to the fluidity of language. I love language. I love words, and I laugh when people online kind of get into battles about words and grammar. I personally am a fan. I'll just say it right here and now of the Oxford comma.
Yes,
I'm a fan of the
thank
Oxford
you.
comma. I always have been. I love it. But language changes, and it moves with the times, and I think we want to pin things down as humans. Everything is constantly in flux, and so the things that we think are not changeable, we want them not to be changeable, even though literally everything changes. So
Yeah.
so it's really interesting. So language, it's like just in our lifetimes, we've seen every year Merriam-Webster announces the new words that they're adding to the dictionary, and there's some kind of debate about whether they're valid or not valid, or what twerk? Why is that I don't know if that's but like, why is this word going in the dictionary? But
Yeah.
I've really been loving the shifting of pronouns and the New York Times. I'm sure other publications have as well, but I remember a few years ago the New York Times published kind of an editorial opinion about the fact that about their position on pronouns and how they are using they and how they sort of defer to the interviewee in terms of what pronouns do they want to use and how they honor that. And, it's interesting. I feel like pronouns is a really great example right now of how the language is shifting and moving, and now using the plural they for a particular person if they choose,
Well, that was the word of the day. Oh, that's not the word of the day. That was the word of the year, I think, a few years ago. They picked singular they specifically because of how it had helped. It helped the rest of us have a convenient, I would say, stopgap towards pronouns for gender fluid and non-binary people.
Yeah.
That it's I don't think it's the perfect solution yet, but it's the most convenient stopgap we have that everybody is familiar with, because we've all used it at some point.
Yeah.
So I remember they selected that, and it was kind of a neat watershed moment, because they're recognizing, hey, this singular they is important to this group of people, so you should get used to it.
Yeah, and it really has been used for a long time anyway, in that way, but just kind of formalizing it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking of something when you were mentioning how language was evolving, and it reminds me of something that one of my favorite actors, Stephen Fry, has said, and he said English is a mongrel language because it's just everything. It's like
sure is.
Any kind of weird rule or weird thing from any other language just gets mashed into this ball, and over time new things get added, and I feel it's so weird to gatekeep English, especially. I think it's weird to gatekeep any language, but English especially. This is the weirdest language to gatekeep.
Yeah, it sure is, and that's what makes it so rich of a language. That is why we have so much. There's a lot of wonderful literature in other languages, of course. But we have so much great English language literature, because it does borrow easily and kind of just take into its arms, I guess. Here's a word from Australia. Here's a word from wherever, Germany, and all the different places. And it's like, oh, we don't think about the origin of all the words that we're saying when we're putting together a sentence.
Exactly.
But we really are, pulling from a lot of different cultures of origin.
Yeah, I think it's great.
It's richer for it, and that's such a great argument for diversity in general. Is that when you have this multiculturalism that comes in to language or other areas, food, culinary arts, it's like, oh, now we have a wider palette to draw from, and what happens when you mash this flavor with that flavor, or this sound with that sound, and put it together. And as songwriters, or just writers in general, we can kind of pick what sounds better in this particular moment, small or little.
Yeah.
Exactly. We have so many synonyms, and do we want the alliteration? Do we want the extra syllable? How do we want to express this?
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
I want to ask you, I want to say that this is exactly what happened when we first logged on and backstage. It's like we just started talking about all kinds of things.
Like immediately, yeah.
Yeah, so fun. I want to say hi to some folks in the chat box for a second. Hi, Mark, again. So great to see you, Mark. It's awesome that you're tuning in. Ashley E. Norton, our guest from a few weeks ago, and the other half of Whitherward. And Susie from Texas. We got our whole Texas crew here. Debbie. Nice to see you. Thank you guys for being here. If you're just tuning in, this is Tomes and Tunes episode 40 with Ed from Whitherward. And please say hi in the chat box. It would be lovely to say hi back to you. Ed, will you tell me how, like, so you started with this folk duo Whitherward, and then now you're doing this podcast, Crimes Against Folk, and of course that's really nice because you live in Arizona and your folk duo partner Ashley lives in California right now, and we're in the middle of the pandemic. Travel is hard. It's hard to, get together and folk out together. So is that why the podcast happened?
Well, we actually had the idea to try and start a podcast a couple years ago. I think it's just something we had always wanted to do. Podcasts are a fantastic way to pass the time on the road.
Yeah.
Especially for me, I prefer listening to them because they keep my brain going.
Yeah.
And keep me from like falling asleep again behind the wheel or whatever.
Yeah.
But you also learn something, which is fantastic. And so we said, well, we've got all these stories, we've got all these friends with stories. We should start our own podcast. And we kind of had, preliminary ideas. And then, we played so much and we were so busy with touring that we just never really got down to it. And we had tried something earlier. We tried kind of a vodcast video. Yeah, like a video podcast. When we had briefly lived in Denver. This was back in 2015. And it was pretty cool, but it was mainly just Ash and I, which is fine. But I think after a while we just kind of got bored with it. And so
you're like, we've been touring together for years now.
Yeah, we tried to kind of come up with angles and it just didn't really work, so we kind of shelved that. But when the pandemic hit, and we were kind of forced off the road, a few months in, we're just like, well, you know what? Why don't we just try it? We had figured out a system to make it work where Ash and I can, play along together with very low latency over the internet. And so that not only helps us kind of still play music together, but it also helps with the podcasting. Like it's so great because when Ash and I are talking over Jamulus, which is the software we use for the audio part, when we live stream, it's almost like we're in the same room together. Like the latency's so low that it makes the conversation really great.
Yeah.
And so that's been really fun. And like most of the things that she and I do, we're always iterating. We're always thinking of new ways, new angles to try it. So it's quite a bit different now than it was back in July when we started it. But yeah. The pandemic was the main driver for us actually doing it.
Yeah. This show didn't exist before the pandemic, so yeah, there's a lot of creative stuff. I think that this has come up over and over again in this show, but this time not to not recognize the devastation and loss of the pandemic. Of course, it's a pandemic, but also to say that there has been a lot of growth and creative innovation and just like, I was curious to try that thing for years. Now all of a sudden I have the time, or just that desire to connect with. For me, it was this show came out of my desire to connect with other songwriters. So,
I think that's a lot of it. Like for us, when we have guests on our show, it's almost like a lot of them are people we've met before, and so it's kind of like, hey, we get to catch up with our friend that we haven't seen in 6 months. So, that's kind of nice.
So I first encountered you and Ashley. You were on stage, actually. We didn't meet at this time, but I was introduced to your music because you were performing for the Far West Folk Alliance Regional Conference in 2019, I think it was. Because 2020 was pandemic. And you and I were also talking about I feel like maybe it was in your introductory bio or something. Like I'm pretty sure I learned that day when you were on stage that you guys also, in addition to the original music that you play, you also do a Simon and Garfunkel kind of thing.
Yeah.
How did you come to that?
Well, we wanted to make money. That was one of the reasons. The other was we want, again, like I mentioned before, Ash and I are always iterating. We're always
Right.
trying to find new ways to survive in the
Yeah.
industry, and so we noted that tribute acts, as it were, seem to get pretty good shows and make a decent amount of money, and we had a bit of a leg up in that we knew a number of Simon and Garfunkel songs, and I'm a huge fan of Simon and Garfunkel. I have been since I was a kid,
Yeah.
and so we said, well, hey, let's put together a tribute duo. I mean, obviously, we don't look like them. I maybe looked like Art a little bit more back then, but not anymore. So it's just like we're just gonna try and do the songs,
I have to say, Ashley looks exactly. She has a spitting image of Paul Simon. Right, Ashley?
right. That's what made that picture so great, because it's just like right there. So we just decided to put it together, and we had a few shows that were kind of not that different from our regular shows, but then we started to get into a couple of performing arts centers, and started, right before the pandemic hit, obviously, we started having some good shows. Like we'd sold out, I think, 3 or 4 shows in a row of this show, and we do make it a little kind of a multimedia thing. Like we have photos and a little clip and stuff like that, and but mostly it's just us playing the music and telling stories about the band that we've gleaned from books and the internet and stuff. And I think it's been really fun. And again, it's been really fun to almost kind of study this music in a way by learning it. So yeah, we just decided it was mostly a ploy to make more money, but also have fun doing it. Because we honestly could have covered anything, but Simon and Garfunkel, we had an edge, and we really like their music.
So you came for the money, but you stayed. I mean, I just imagine that you could have worse master teachers than Simon and Garfunkel in terms
True.
of harmony, and Paul Simon in terms of songwriting.
Yeah.
I mean, to go inside of that music and to know it not just as a listener and a fan, but to really learn it in order to perform it and study the stories and all of that stuff. Yeah.
I think in addition that this show also it's a good, like, because we've all played those shows where you're in a loud wherever, it's a 4-hour gig, nobody's listening.
Cappuccino machine.
Yep. Yep, exactly. Every artist has those stories. And so for us, Scarborough was also a way to actually get a good show for us out of it. Like when we're up there, I mean, and playing, you can hear a pin drop sometimes, or everybody's singing along, and it's not our music, but we don't care because people are still getting a lot out of it. And I think that to us matters more than, however much we're getting paid. Like it's actually a really good it's kind of a soul fulfilling show in a way, because we're people will come up to us after and say, oh, I heard that song. That song was playing at my prom in 1972 or whatever. It's like, that kind of stuff really helps make those shows far more worth it than they would be.
Yeah.
So
I love it. I'm thinking about all the different, I mean, I'm just running through a catalog in my head of songs that I love of theirs and of Paul Simon's.
My favorite, I think, is For Emily, Wherever I May Find Her, which is just, I heard it when I was a kid. I'm like, this is the most beautiful song I've ever heard.
What is it that you love about it?
It's the imagery. Like I'm not great at like listening to a song and picking up imagery from the words. It's not a strong suit of mine. But with that song, it was like, it was like clear as day what was going on. Like I could paint the scene in my head. That's the main part of it that I really got out of it. So.
Beautiful. Well, that's actually a really great segue into the theme of the show, Tomes and Tunes. So let's use that as a segue into the tomes part. So you said that you're not a big book reader, which
Not
I
an
gotta say,
avid
when you're
reader.
on the road, it's really hard to read if you're driving. Right? So
Yeah, that is. I can use that as my excuse right now, but it's also just I kind of lost the book reading part. I do read a lot, but it's the
Yeah.
book reading part I haven't regained yet. But I have read a few books. So,
yeah. Well, what do you have to share with us today?
so the main book I wanted to plug, in essence, is a book about linguistics, and I'm
Appropriate.
exactly. As I've gotten older, I've gotten more interested in linguistics, and so this all started when I was reading a blog called All Things Linguistic. It's run by a Canadian linguist called Gretchen McCulloch, and through that I found her kind of partner, her like scholastic partner, Lauren Gaughan, who's a Australian linguist, and they have a podcast called Lingthusiasm, which I highly recommend if you are even remotely interested in linguistics. It's fantastic. And Gretchen McCulloch just wrote a book called Because Internet, and it is a study of internet linguistics, things like how we speak. It's sort of an academic look at informal speech. Most academic texts in the realm of linguistics involve formal speech, whether it's law or research papers or, APA, whatever, that kind of stuff. But there's not a lot out there with informal speech. And so what Gretchen...
Which is what the rest of us use.
Exactly. Which is what we're all using right now in the comments right here.
Right.
And so what she has been studying for years and what she wanted to codify in a book was how we use informal speech over the internet, and how we have used it over the decades that the internet has been publicly accessible. And it's utterly fascinating when you think about it, because, for those of us that have grown up since the internet's inception in the public world, like, say mid to late 80s, I would say, or, early 90s, we've seen how the platforms have changed. We've seen how the language we use online has changed, and it changes practically every other month. And so I think being able to codify that in a book is really interesting, because you can see, like, oh, wow, here's where we started and here's where we are now. And there's this strata that you can look through of, people who've been on the internet for a while, and then, kids or teens who are just getting on it now, and seeing how that's different, like origins of emoji, and emoticons, all of these things. She just researched, like, hey, here's where they came from, here's how they're used, and here's who uses them. It's such an interesting study of informal speech on the internet, that I think we don't really think about all that often when we're using it. People love to point it out, like, oh, those kids using their whatever words, or they're ever, are they talking?
Grumble.
Yeah, are they speaking in code? Like, who cares? But like, it's interesting to see that.
I only understand about 40% of what my 16-year-old says. It's just I'm just like, oh yeah. I just smile and nod.
Yeah, but I think isn't that interesting? Like, if you compared how you talk online with how your 16-year-old talks online, it's so interesting to see how those differ because of how everybody has grown up with the internet.
Yeah.
And that's mainly what this book is looking at, is how how society has grown with the internet and how informal speech has evolved along with it.
Well, do you have a little passage or something to share?
I do from that book. Let me pull it up here
Let's see
real quick.
here.
Da, da, da.
Hello, Andre, by the way. Hello. And then we have um, a little conversation that was happening in the comments about favorite Paul Simon songs. Oh, Ashley, you have a new dog named Garfunkel. Perfect.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she has a really cute puppy named Garfunkel. She's so cute. Okay, I've got one here. All right. So this is from Because Internet, and this is by Gretchen McCulloch. Many popular social apps are simply variations on a chat app that happen to gain a foothold in a particular area, like WhatsApp in much of the world outside of North America, WeChat in China, and Line in Japan and Korea. The biggest change that the chat paradigm developed as smartphones caught on was the integration of multimedia. Snapchat and its imitators let you send a photo with words on top that disappears after a few seconds. WeChat, WhatsApp, and their imitators let you send a short audio clip which is integrated into the back and forth chat interface. Both can be more expressive, but can also be hard to use in dark or loud environments. So we just see kind of the outgrowth of these chat apps. I hate to say this way, but people my age remember things like ICQ and AOL Instant Messenger and MSN Messenger, and those kind of things can. We remember what they look like. And they've evolved into things like Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp and Signal and all these other things. It's funny how they keep kind of resurfacing after they die out for a little while, and then they keep resurfacing with added features like pictures and video and all that stuff. So
It's kind of radical, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that Clubhouse, I don't know if you're on the new Clubhouse platform, but, it's just audio.
Yeah,
There's
isn't that
no
interesting?
visual, and it's so radical just to come back to verbal language without the supplementation or supplement. I'm going to stumble over this word. Which version of the word should I use? Without supplementing verbal language with some kind of visual, like you're talking about, or
Right.
we have like the written language with the picture of the emoji. Thank you, Ashley, Ashley, for the emojis in her
There you go.
in her comment. Like, it's like we kind of use this you know multifaceted way to communicate now that includes the verbal, the written, the emoji, the picture, all of the stuff. And Clubhouse is just verbal, like talking on the phone.
Yeah, you're like in a room on a party line, basically talking to people,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is interesting. A little disorienting, I think, but
Yeah. I still don't know how I feel about it.
you know, yeah,
But
I'm a little
I like
cautious myself.
podcasts.
But yeah, that's one of the things I had been reading in the past couple of years or so, and I just love it.
Yeah.
So
Very interesting. So that one is called Because Internet.
yep, and it's
Okay.
by Gretchen McCulloch.
Gretchen McCulloch.
Yep.
I am still working on a novel that I've been reading. I've shared the last 2 weeks, I think, excerpts from this. The Overstory by Richard Powers. And this book tells the story of people, but also the story of trees. And
Oh.
there's a lot to be learned from this novel about the life of trees, the history of various species across the U.S., and all of the characters are initially introduced through their relationship with trees or their non-relationship with trees in one way or another. And then as I'm only about a little more than halfway through the book, I have not gotten any reading in this book done this week because it's the Folk Alliance conference, and I have just been completely taken up with all of that. But I'm going to share a little bit from this. The characters that this little piece is about, they I think that they are not into trees. If I'm remembering correctly, they don't care. However, they meet, and their first date, if I'm remembering correctly, their first date, the woman proposes to the man that they go audition for a community theater for their first date. And they end up falling in love with the theater and falling in love with each other, and they have a bit of a tortured relationship, but eventually they are together at this moment in the book and married, and they have been so for some time. And initially, to celebrate their anniversary, they would plant something, a tree, every year for their anniversary. But over the years, that tradition just sort of fell by the wayside, and at this moment in the book, their relationship has largely fallen by the wayside. And so I'm going to share a little passage. I'm going to put on my reading glasses. And Ashley, to answer your question, I am old enough, but also she is my stepdaughter. So that answers your question. Okay, so this is the Brinkmans. They are now married. They have a standing joke at Christmas. A joke that almost... Wait, sorry, let me read that again. They have a standing joke at Christmas. A joke always ready not to be one on a moment's notice. One gift they give each other must be the annual attempted conversion. This year, he gives her 50 ideas that change the world. Wait a second, did I read this one last week? Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. 50 ideas to change the world. Honey, how thoughtful. Sure changed me. He will never change, she thinks, and kisses him near the lips. Then she comes through with her part of the ritual. A new annotated edition of 4 great novels by Jane Austen. Dorothy, darling, you read my mind. You know you could try her one of these years. He tried her years ago and almost choked to death from claustrophobia. They spend the holidays in their robes, each reading the gift they bought the other. On New Year's, they struggle to make it to midnight. They lie in bed side by side, leg to leg, but with hands firmly on the pages in front of them. Falling asleep, he reads the same paragraph a dozen times. The words turn into twirling things like winged seeds spinning in the air. Happy New Year, he says when the ball drops at last. Survived another one, huh? They pour the bubbles that have been waiting by the bedside on ice. She clinks, drinks, and says, "We should have an adventure this year." The bookcases are full of previous resolutions, taken up and shelved. No sweat Indian cooking. 100 hikes to the greater Yellowstone. A field guide to eastern songbirds, to eastern wildflowers. Off the beaten path in Europe. Unknown Thailand. Manuals of beer brewing and winemaking, untouched foreign language texts, all those scattered explorations, theirs to sample and squander. They have lived like flighty and forgetful gods. Something life-threatening, she adds. I was just thinking that. Maybe we should run a marathon. I could be your trainer or whatever. Something we could do together. Pilot's license? Maybe, he says, comatose with fatigue. Welp. He sets the glass down and slaps his thigh. Yup. One more page before lights out. And that's it.
That's neat. I like that.
I love how their relationship is just described through, through what they like to read and their lack of common interest in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's neat. Remind me the name of that book again?
It's called The Overstory.
The Overstory.
And
Richard Powers. Okay.
Richard Powers, yeah. And each in the first half of the book, each chapter is a totally different tree and a totally different character. It reads like short stories at the beginning, and then the second half of the book, they start to, kind of swirl in together. It appears.
Nice.
That's what I'm getting from it. And I have as I have shared that I'm reading this book, many people have said, "Oh my gosh, I love that book. It's my favorite book." And so there you go, the endorsement of others.
Fantastic.
And do you have a song that you can share with us today?
I do actually.
Yay!
I'll play this one.
Oh, Ashley says that you have a song, Whitherward. I stumble on that. Whitherward recorded about a human relationship with trees. Is that true, Ed?
That is true. I can do that one if you like.
Ooh. Ashley, look at that. You have changed the course of present day history making.
Yeah, I did. I actually, it's funny because we went and visited a redwood forest up near Santa Cruz. And I'd never seen a redwood tree before, like a proper redwood. And it was just the coolest thing I'd ever seen.
You're going to love this book. You got to read this, Ed. They have just gotten to the redwood forest.
Ooh, okay,
they are seeing the redwoods for the first time.
Sold. And I was sitting at one of the places I frequently stay is with Ashley's aunt, who also is in Scottsdale, and I was thinking about that forest, and so I'm like, oh, I want to write a song about how cool forests are. And I got about one verse in, I'm like, oh, I can't finish. I can do this, but it's going to be like a punk song, in one verse. And so I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft at the time because I'm a big gamer, and that's my game. And one of my favorite parts of that game is this big forest and the race that occupies it, this race of elves that have been living for, hundreds of thousands of years or whatever. And so I decided to kind of co-opt part of their story into the song and then mix it in with whatever I was experiencing and kind of build this narrative. And I think it actually turned out pretty cool. So, yeah, I'll give that a go. I haven't played it in a while, so I apologize if I forget the words. But this is called The Sanctuary. We had a choice to make. We had a world to save. A sacrifice was all that it would take. Without a pause for thought, a soul-bound weapon sought to vanquish evil from the sacred place. Her life was given up so that we would endure. The world we had was base and impure. Anew, remade with love, we plant the seeds and tend. The sanctuary would grow again. Sun shafts dart through the trees and dance among the breeze. They strike my face with a familiar ease. This forest gave me life and opened up my eyes. Here I was born and here I hope to die. The sun, to catch the sun, I climb the redwood arms to guard the canopy from our foes. It's true, I knew that I had been immortal once, but this was not the fate that I chose. stoic resplendency, enshrined among the leaves, their veins connected to the history. 1,000 years, embracing nature's tears, to give their shelter to the creatures here. This light I give to you, they gave to me before, to ward the forces that can restore. My son, my only son, today becomes the day. The sanctuary calls you a man. Thank you.
I love it. I was singing along. Ashley said that she was singing harmony, and I was. It has a really great melody.
Thank you.
So I put myself on mute, but I was over here singing.
Thank you.
That was so nice. And Ashley had mentioned she heard me whistling. I think I played a song where I whistled when Ashley was on the show, and she had mentioned that you are a whistler as well. And what a beautiful whistle.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just kind of started doing it one day.
Yeah.
But
I actually remember the day I first tried to whistle. I'll leave that story for another time. But but I was a little kid. But yeah, you have a beautiful whistle.
thank you.
Oh, I love it. I just feel like that was such a gift. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm glad Ash suggested that, so I could change. I had a totally other song prepared, but I was like, oh, let's do this one.
And you knew all the words. There are a lot of words in that song too. You remember all of them. That's fantastic. Thank you, Ed.
You're welcome.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and play a song. I tried to play this a couple of weeks ago. This is a really new song for me. But the reason I want to play it is because you and Ashley in your Crimes Against Folk show recently had an episode on Elizabeth Cotten. And as I was mentioning behind the scenes before we went live, Elizabeth Cotten, I first encountered her on the radio station in Boston, WERS. They played Shake Sugaree. This was probably around, I want to say around the year 2000, give or take a year or two. They played it in their morning show, their coffee house in the morning. I loved that show. I listened to it every day, and
Is that like a folk show?
it was a folk show. Yeah, I don't know if it's still on at the same time or, but they were just such a great station, still are, for the Boston music scene. And so when they played, a lot of times they would play local artists, new artists, independent artists. And so when they played Elizabeth Cotten's Shake Sugaree, I was like, oh, this is a new artist. Who is this? And I didn't know for years that actually, no, she wasn't a new artist. She was a very old artist. And she's also the one who we think of when we think of the song Freight Train. And she has a very distinct finger-picking pattern. And I think... Am I right about this? Did she play upside down? Was she a lefty?
Yep, she played Jimi Hendrix style.
Okay, yeah, so...
Upside down and backwards.
Right. So to actually play her exact style as someone who's not playing upside down and backwards, I don't, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I had in my mind that I wanted to learn how to play the way that she played, sort of. And that led to this song of mine that I wrote pretty recently, and it just kind of naturally, I started taking what I had learned by looking at her writing, her style of playing, and anyway, Still new to it, so gonna try. Ashley, thanks for coming. She said that she had to jump on a Zoom, but I'm gonna try this one. I played it a few weeks ago. It went okay. We'll try it again.
Cool.
So it's called Born for This Ride. When you stand at the station to purchase your seat, when you lay down your one-way fare and fold the ticket neatly, when you turn from the seller and push through the crowd, don't stop at the platform, the train is leaving right now. Ooh, ooh, ooh. You gotta get on that train when it's calling you, though it might stall on the line. You gotta keep an eye on the glowing moon, rising sun, got honest truth. Have faith you're making good time, 'cause you were born for this ride. When the ground starts to rumble and you're going full tilt, when you fret that you're unprepared and you're losing your will, you can look in the mirror, but don't stay there too long. All that it shows is what's already gone. Ooh, ooh, ooh. You gotta get on that train when it's calling you, though it might stall on the line. You gotta keep an eye on the glowing moon, rising sun, got honest truth. Have faith you're making good time, 'cause you were born for this ride. Oh, what happened? Oh, there we go. Train comes off the track sometimes. You gotta get on that train when it's calling you, though it might stall on the line. You gotta keep an eye on the glowing moon, rising sun, got honest truth. Have faith you're making good time, 'cause you were born for this ride. I'm gonna leave the coda for another time. That was
great.
inspired. That was inspired by Elizabeth Cotton.
I love that. You get the picking pattern down. I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, and I think that's the first time I've ever actually written about, for me, this is a song about being a songwriter, and I quit music for a long time and then came back to it. And, you know, just that kind of comforting message, I guess, like, don't worry, you know, life is meandering, and, you know, you might take turns. Don't worry if it stalls on the line. Like, you're on the right train. You're making good time. You'll be fine, you know.
Yeah.
This is the train you should be on. So, yeah.
That's fantastic.
Thank you. Ed, thank you so much for being my guest today. It's
thanks for
really
having me.
fun. Yeah.
This was really great.
Fun getting to know you and talking, and so many great conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a blast. Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe we'll meet on the other side. I saw Ashley mention Crimes Against Folk, and maybe we'll have another conversation at some point in time. But this was a great way to. I mean, I know that I don't think you're part of the Folk Alliance conference this week, right? But for me, I am, and this just fit right in with the whole thing. And so, thank you so much. Yeah. So everybody say goodbye to Ed. Thank you all for coming, and I'm going to take Ed out and just say goodbye to you all. Thank you for being here for another episode of Tomes and Tunes every week, same time, same place. And just thank you, and thank you to Far West the Regional Folk Alliance, for being my media partner in this. Please stay safe, be sound, take care of yourself, all that stuff. Nurture your heart. And I'll see you next week. Take good care.